Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. 20 years ago, the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX anime aired, and we are celebrating the 20th year anniversary. And while I have been an outspoken critic of the remaster that we have gotten, often calling it the GX disaster, I will say something really cool that has come out of this is the GX Duel Memorial album. Now, this is going to be a series of interviews done with Duel Writer Masahiro Hikokubo, a man who actually was the main duel writer for every single Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime, and he's going to be giving brief notes, I believe from episode 20 onwards, about different behind-the-scenes elements. And so in this video, I am going to go over some interview excerpts that I found particularly interesting regarding the Ojamas, Mokey Mokey, and, of course, Hell Kaiser. So here are Hikokubo's thoughts on episode 20, which was the duel between Blair and Judai. Originally, it was decided that Satomi Rei would use Unhappy Girl as the centerpiece of her deck, and the duel was created around that. But in the final version, it was decided that to represent a young girl who is in love with being in love, like Rei, a new monster called Maiden in Love was created. Now, what I find really fascinating about this is the Unhappy Girl was never actually used by Rei. So not only did they change her ace monster, but her original ace monster was never even used by her in a single duel. So that's why, man, I just love these sorts of interviews and behind the scenes stuff, because you get so much information that has never been available to the public previously. Also, when speaking about episode 24, he says, the debut appearance of Ojama Yellow, I would have never thought that it would become one of the monsters that would represent GX. I could only laugh at this because he's not wrong. Like, I would have never assumed either that the Ojamas would have gained the popularity that they did, but if you have any doubts about the popularity of the Ojama trio, just look at the recent Yu-Gi-Oh! U2's collab. The Ruby Carbuncle is adorable, and then you've got these three Ojama freaks. But clearly, they have a lot of marketing power, otherwise they would not have been made into U2's plushies, which is pretty hilarious. Now, skipping along to the Camula stuff. The continuous spell Genesis Crisis was used in tandem with Vampire Genesis, and it was intended to be an absurdly powerful card that I used the effect of twice without hesitation in order to allow Camula's dark power stand out more and make Shining Flare Wingman literally shine even brighter in the duel. At least that's what I intended, but the combo it enabled was kind of boring. I would suggest things like this, but the flavor changes depending on the length and tempo. I regret not being able to make that combo stand out even more. I think it's interesting reading about original intended effects, right? Genesis Crisis was intended to be a ridiculously powerful card, and Hikokubo expresses some regrets in not making that combo stand out more than it did in the show. Now, I believe Genesis Crisis was only used in episode 33, which was the duel where Camula was finally defeated, and it was the debut of Shining Flare Wingman, if I remember correctly. So, a really interesting note there. And then the Kaibaman stuff. Hikokubo wrote the plot and scenario for the Game Boy Advance game Reshef of Destruction. God, what a nightmare that game was. And one of the event characters I included was Kaibaman, who I was surprised became an official card game card. And I ended up wondering, could they appear in the anime if we consider them a spirit? And if that happens, could Blue Eyes White Dragon also appear? Despite the fact Kaibaman is a monster who is separate from Kaiba, he ends up being voiced by Suda Kenjiro, and I remember thinking, it's gotta be Suda-san. So kind of crazy to think that the only reason Kaibaman was in Yu-Gi-Oh! GX was because Kaibaman was included as an event character in the video game Reshef of Destruction. I don't think anybody would have been able to put those two things together. That is just like a crazy cause and effect. Because he was chosen as an event character in Reshef, he ended up being a character in the GX anime, and a character who beat Judai, which is only something that him, Ryo Marufuji, and Edo can claim to have done. So he was a pretty important character as well in Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, given the role that he had. Really fascinating there. There were a couple of questions that the interviewer asked. What deck was played before being switched to Mokey Mokey? Hikokubo says, unfortunately, there isn't any major documentation on that, but we were thinking about slime/jam to emphasize the softness angle, but that makes it sound like Motege met Mokey Mokey and had a tryst with it, so maybe a more hardcore dragon deck. Would have been really weird if the Mokey Mokey guy was playing like Marik's Slimes. That would have just been weird. I think Mokey Mokey was the perfect choice for him. What ideas did you consider for the Cyber Dragon themes used by Ryo? I'd love to know how you came up with the cards and his duels. Cyber Dragon's, of course, still today one of the most popular card archetypes in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! As Judai's biggest rival, I knew Ryo's deck had to include powerful monsters, so it was extremely tempting to give him dragons, but that would make him too similar to Kaiba, and it would bring nothing new to the table. So I ended up proposing, why not a machine-type dragon as a symbol of new strength? At the same time, I was thinking to myself, how can I make level 5s more useful? So I came up with an effect that would allow it to be treated as a low-level monster with some conditions. I wanted Ryo, a third-year student, to have a strong impact by bringing out higher-level monsters. Cyber End Dragon. I was originally concerned about not being able to fit in Ultimate, but one of the staff members ended up suggesting its current name. We took that idea and used it. Honestly, now that I think about it, it's a pretty good name. And I would agree. I would certainly agree. I think Cyber End Dragon is such a great name. It has that name structure where when it comes out, you just feel like the duel is going to come to an end. And what I love about this answer is it confirms that Ryo Marufuji is one of Judai's biggest rivals. Interestingly enough, the Duel Writer here refers to Kaiser as Judai's biggest rival. Now, I've always considered Manjome Chaz to be Judai's main rival, but much like Zexal, I always viewed Yu-Gi-Oh! GX as an anime that had two rivals for our main protagonist, Ryo and Manjome, and I've gotten a few people push back on the idea that Ryo is not actually a rival to Judai, so I love here that we have someone who worked on the show, was the main duel writer, literally calling him Judai's biggest rival. So that should put to bed any discussions there on whether or not Hellkaiser was a rival character for Judai. GX has many unique decks, such as the tennis deck. How were you able to come up with such odd strategies versus other series? I'm happy they asked him this because GX had some ridiculously unique one-off decks. GX was a special time, and especially in the early days, the scriptwriters would put their heads together and come up with all sorts of ideas, and we spent a lot of time discussing whether we could reproduce them in a duel or not. So there was a lot of excitement on set wondering, can we recreate X in a duel? So in my mind, there was someone who was just a big fan of tennis, was a big fan of Wimbledon, was a big fan of the Australian Open, and said, let's make this a Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck. And they did. The tennis deck is one of the more memorable decks, I would argue, from the early days of the GX anime that remains, an anime exclusive one-off deck. But yeah, a lot of really, really cool information in these interviews. What we've gotten so far is the Memorial Album number 1 and number 4. I imagine number 2 and 3 will come out at some point soon. If there's any interesting information in there, maybe I'll make another video about it. But we should continue to get interviews with Masahiro Hikokubo, and I'm sure, much like Fire Dragon yesterday, which to everyone who checked out that video, thank you so much, we will continue to get interesting, never before heard, behind the scenes stuff. And nowadays, this is like my favorite element when it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh! Thank you guys all so much for watching. If you have any comments or questions or things that you hope we hear later on about GX, Air Neos, I really hope he talks about Air Neos, please let me know down below in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have an amazing day. Take care, guys.